Good. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October meeting. And tonight we're going to start with our first lightning talk. It's from John Bushu regarding .NET on embedded device on TinyCLR.
Post a link in the comments through Michigan Devs.
I'm doing it everywhere, Joe.
Or we got like that.
Hi, I'm John Boucher. I'm the engineering lead at GHI Electronics, and I'm going to talk about .NET on embedded devices using TinyCLR. Today, the world we live in is fully embedded. Everything, pretty much everywhere, uses embedded somewhere. Factories, the assembly lines, sensors, asset tracking in Amazon's factories, just everything today has embedded technology somewhere. It ranges to scale from tiny little chips to huge big control systems run by the Raspberry Pi to full computers, everything. Even the drones that are everywhere today, that is a form of embedded programming. Traditionally, how it's done so far is usually in C or C++, very low level technology. It's not the easiest to do. The IDEs leave a lot to be desired. They're a bit older, they're not as nice as, say, the one we quite all like, which is Visual Studio. Even once you're in the IDE, writing the code, it's not like package managers that we have today with NuGet and everything. And especially when you're trying to debug what you're working on, it's not as easy as it is. You have to either buy a JTAG, which is a device you use to debug with embedded devices, and if you can't even do that, it goes all the way down to no debugging at all. You still have to keep changing things, hoping it works, to a step above that, which is printf debugging, just inserting statements all over the place, hoping that you get the output you need. So that definitely adds a lot of time and money to developing a solution in the embedded world. Windows IoT Core does improve upon this a lot. You get to use the modern IDE, you get debugging, it's quick and everything. So that really helped a lot. So what we're doing with TinyCLR is trying to hit the sweet spot between Windows IoT Core and the low level C. You still get to use the same IDE. You get to write in C#, VB, all the .NET languages that you expect. And you get to use the regular debugging capabilities. You can F5, F11, step in, step through, step over, all that works in TinyCLR. So you really get the speed that Visual Studio offers you to develop your solution quickly and to get your product to market if you're working on a product. We get we get a subset of the full .NET base class library that you usually are using. So some classes don't necessarily make sense, so we don't have everything on the device. We give you what you need to get started or what you need to use, because these are very resource constrained devices, because we really want to target the low power and low cost chips, the chips that cost 10 cents that are smaller than your thumb. So there's only so many resources you have available, so we're targeting that very specifically. One of the things that we're really trying to do with TinyCLR is to make it very portable very quickly. So as a matter of fact, when you download TinyCLR today, there's the script to build it. It will build you a firmware that runs on your device that we talk to run your program that builds in 10 seconds or less. So you can easily take an existing device, existing firmware for a device, copy it, change the information you need for your device, build it, and you're running a brand new firmware for your device very quickly. Now that's, of course, the ideal setup. If you're talking a brand new chip, a brand new architecture that we don't already have a port for, there's a bit more work that you need to do there. But the nice thing is with TinyCLR, we've provided the core. It's already done for you. The .NET interpreter, the debugger, all that's done. It's provided for a library you can take to various architectures, Cortex, M3, M4 if you're familiar with those from ARM. So you can just take that and port it to your device very easily. There's very minimal functions you have to add to get the basics up and running. So the whole thing with TinyCLR, the big benefit here is that you get to use your existing .NET talent that you may already have in your company or yourself or wherever, so you can very quickly turn around an embedded solution to get going with .NET. You don't need to worry about buying the compilers, buying the IDEs, getting a license, getting a JTAG, any of the other tools you may necessarily need for embedded development. You use the .NET talent you already have. Visual Studio 2017 community already works. You have that. You just install the extension, like you do any other extension, and now you can run TinyCLR. Plug your device into your computer over USB, and it works. So there's very minimal overhead to get started, which we're really trying to keep as small as possible. And just to give you a short idea of it, you can look here. A lot of this code may look familiar from Windows IoT Core if you're familiar with it. That is TinyCLR code. It's running exactly the same, so we're trying to target the same base class library from .NET and the UWP APIs so that we can make it very easy to get started. So you just see very simply here, you get a G-pad controller, which is a thing that controls pins on a board. Turn them on, off, high, low. So you just get that controller, which is on the device. You pick which pin you want to open, whichever one you need to use to work. Make it an output, and then you're in a loop. Blinking an LED, toggling a pin, high or low, anything you may need to do. And this is, as you can see, it's in main. There's no setup you need to do, no initialization, no worrying about clocks, RAM, flash, or anything about your device. That's already handled in the firmware for you. So it's the same exact thing you do with any other project in .NET. File, new, go to TinyCLR, pick your project, and you're seeing static void main like we expect. And if your device is already plugged in, you can press F11, F5, whichever, to step into it and start debugging. You get the same pause, stop, call stack, thread view, everything you already use on the computer today when you're debugging .NET. You get that on a device that you can put in drones to fly around, take a picture, take tracking information, to, like I was saying, track assets in a factory or a warehouse like Amazon's, or aggregating a bunch of data from sensors from around your house. You're doing a temperature sensor, humidity, trackers for motion outside, or cameras. You can aggregate all that data on the device, and then you can connect to the internet, to Azure, to any other service you may want. It's all up to you, and send that data off to the cloud, or anywhere else you may need to go. So we are trying to hit that sweet spot right between IoT Core and the very low-level devices so you can get started very easy. We also do enable you for the tasks that require very hard real-time programming. We enable you to actually write native code where it is needed for your application. Because you can do quite a lot. The goal is to do as much as you can here, but sometimes you may need to toggle a pin at 10 megahertz. There's only so much you can do with an interpreted environment, which TinyCLR is. So if you need low-level code, C, C++, assembly, anything else targeting any of the ARM architectures we support, that is available to you. And you can use it very similar to pinvoke today. Not there all the way, but it's very similar. You just add it to your project, add it to your device, and it works. So we're making it as easy as you can. So, any questions? Thank you.
Next. Your turn, Dave.
It's a good thing.
That keeps them.
It's just like that.
Thanks, John. Our second lightning talk is by X2, Dave, right?
Yes.
And it's about deploying Facebook's great React app onto Azure. So here's Dave.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Dave.
Here's my last minute slides. John, yours looked too good, so I had to come up with something last minute. So welcome. My name's Dave Farinelli. I'm a software consultant at X2. What I want to talk about today is deploying Create React app. Just a quick show of hands. Is anyone here familiar with React, the front-end technology? Not bad, about half of the people here. So for anybody who's not familiar, React is kind of one of the newer JavaScript frameworks. It's like the popular one of the year. You know, I assume in a year or two they'll come up with something nicer, a little bit better. Same, you know, pretty common thing. What I went through for my motivation on this is I'm actually in charge of redesigning our company's website. And at the same point, we're taking a lot of our technology and we're moving it over to Azure. So I had kind of an experience taking what we had worked on and deploying it over into Azure. So I just wanted to kind of show like my experience, kind of things that happened as a result, and how to make it easier for you. So what is Create React app? For anybody who does know with React, usually one of the difficulties is getting it started. You know, kind of the workflow, kind of setting up the project to be able to run regularly is pretty difficult. You need to have a good understanding of the different dependencies. This is Facebook's answer to make that simple. Effectively, if you take a look at these 4 commands here, you know, this is a way to effectively build something that will work immediately. So just to show you really quick, I went ahead and built something quickly. So this would be me running the same 4 commands that I had just seen. It'll build real fast. And you can see, so within less than a couple minutes, I can have something like this immediately. And I have a whole code base that I can work with and deploy to. So what I want to do is I basically want to take an application that I built using this and deploy it over to Azure. So cheating a little bit here, but I'm going to show what we have for our website. So same framework, just a little bit nicer looking. So you can see it's the same thing. Obviously, Create React app doesn't make it look like this immediately, but you can see we have a little bit more comprehensive application here. The big takeaway I want to take from this is that we have something that's serving as a single page application. So it has a couple different links that I can go to, and so on. So we'll go back into this. So here's 6 steps. I'm going to walk through them really quickly. And again, just for the sake of time, I want to, not going to walk through everything directly, but kind of show a quick way to do it. So within this same setup, I have the ability to minify everything and get it ready for deployment. And what I'm going to do is we're going to act like I had just done that, and we're going to move this to what we're going to call our production site. So I built something here. This is supposed to be, if you look at the bar here, this is an app that I've created inside Azure. It is just an app service, just like any web app that I have in place. And what this will do is kind of serve as like a place for me to put those files. And you can see right now we don't have anything in place. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to connect into it. Into this. And this would be me running the build process for Create React app. What this does is basically takes all the code base and minifies it down to make it load faster.
You don't want the web config?
We don't. Funny enough, it'll actually come over here and tell me if I'm running the development version or the production version. So that's finished. And you can see now, here's my site. However, if you take a look at the version running now, and you take a look at this, the fonts are messed up, right? And the other problem I run into is if I come in here and I have, like, say, this capabilities page, and I come in fresh. This will work fine, but if I try to do this using, do it correctly. Come in here, I come into a problem. And the major reason for that, coming back into my slides. Is routing doesn't work because it needs to be configured on the server. The WFF files also don't serve correctly. It's not something that naturally works inside Azure. The solution is putting in this web config. So I'm going to go back to this. Go back to my FTP server. I've already got the files here. Put this in place. Refresh. And voila.
It shows it's in that web config again, like in the text
Sure.
editor or something?
So I've got it in here. I'll also open it up for you.
It's kind of hard to see on the slide. There we go.
Can you see that, or do you want me to zoom in a little bit? Let's see if I can. Yeah.
There we go.
There. And there's really two parts of this that matter. This rule here that I'm creating for React routes, what this is basically doing is taking anything I have, redirecting it back to my index file, which then through React will route it to the correct place. The second part here, this WFF, all this is doing is saying to serve that static content, which in my case is just a special file. Any questions? Here's my sources. I can put these links on the meetup just in case. Both of these can walk through if you run into it alongside the slides. Any questions overall? No? Nice and easy. Thank you.
It keeps doing that.
We'll figure something out. Slides. Nope.
Thank you, Dave. So let's get to our featured presentation tonight. Our speaker is
No.
has been
One more lightning talk.
no
No, only two.
Oh,
no
okay.
so
No.
our speaker for tonight has been in software, been developing software for 20 plus years, and in the Microsoft stack is a sub-contractor, a business owner, and the dad for the most of 10 years. And he was also a guest in a podcast, Developer on Fire, episode 220 last March, I think 2017. And that's where I learned that we had the same kind of experience where he started with Visual Basic 3, right? And then VB.NET, and then a C#. So, so tonight is going to be talking about understanding real value of open source by example. So here's John Baluka. Welcome, John.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, even better. I'm John Baluka from St. Louis, Missouri, and I was getting pretty comfortable sitting out there in the crowd, so now I'm like, oh, I gotta start speaking. So trying to get in that mode. So in St. Louis, I help coordinate the .NET meetup there. I just started getting involved with speakers, and I want to say that this particular meetup has been awesome to work with. So when it comes to being responsive and just how well organized, I mean, you guys are doing some really good stuff here. So there's a lot I'm going to be taking back to St. Louis to what we should be doing, especially lightning talks. It's great that that's encouraged. So the original title of this talk was nopCommerce.NET Developer Overview from 0 to 60. And really the the real value, the non-technical takeaway, is understanding the value of open source. And we're going to look at the example of nopCommerce, but it's really understanding the value of open source for the normal 9 to 5, or maybe 7 to 7, I don't know, you know how it gets, for your normal developer on how they can get something out of open source. Because a lot of times, you know, when you hear about open source, you hear about whatever frameworks, but you never really hear about the different end-to-end solutions, like nopCommerce and a bunch of other ones out there, that really apply to your day job, that you could look at as a reference architecture, just to at least get some ideas from. So we're going to be walking through nopCommerce as an example of something that's out there, but you know, there's a lot of aspects to open source to really dig into for yourself. So we're going to jump right into open source, like look for, or what to look for out there. Then I'm going to cover what nopCommerce really is. But this is really you're going to see a lot of code. So this is definitely a technical talk. So we're going to walk through nopCommerce from the front end all the way to the back end. So the different application entry points, how business logic is handled, the data access layer. We'll even look at the test coverage. So yeah, we're going to be walking through this product and this entire solution. And I'll share some resources at the end. My email address is what you want to hang on to. I'm going to kind of go at a pretty swift pace here. So if you're trying to write any of this down, I'd say just write down my email address at the end. I will give you a copy of the slides. I also recorded this as well ahead of time, so this is already pre-recorded. So you'll just have to email me and you'll get all this material. So when it comes to how we're going to walk through the projects, have a pretty good basis at 0, to where you're expected to kind of know C#, at least where you can read it. But then we're going to walk through the projects from front end to back end. So nopWeb is that storefront for the e-commerce store. And then there's a common library that's utilized for the storefront as well as the administration site. So there's some common components that we'll briefly look at. And then there's nopCore, which is kind of a common layer for all the different projects. And then nopServices. nopServices isn't really standalone service. This is a product that's a one install, so it's not like a multi-tier type application. That's probably one of the reasons why it's so popular. It's easy to get up and running. But this is really the library that contains most of the business logic, and we're going to look into see how that's structured. nopData, that's where you got your typical data access to the database. We're going to look at some of the test coverage as well. And I'm going to touch on what it is to create plugins for this solution. So what I like about this solution is that it's a really good example of a lot of the common technologies for a .NET developer when they're creating a ASP.NET MVC application. So where you got razor view pages and jQuery on the front end, I know that might feel a little dated. I'm going to mention that a little later and touch on that. Because I know Angular and React are kind of the craze, but let's talk about that a little bit later. But then on the data access side, you got Entity Framework, SQL Server, so some really common technologies of this type of application for a .NET developer. We're also going to look at AutoFact and AutoMapper as well, so those are some pieces that you may not be aware of. So as a .NET developer, you really have no excuse not to try this stuff out on your own, because you can actually just get the Visual Studio Dev Essentials, where you can download the Community Edition, which is actually the Professional Edition, that you can create code from. If you are a multi-million-dollar organization, yes, you cannot release that compiled code that you created with that tool. So when it comes to, Visual Studio itself, you want the Professional Edition, get the Community Edition. Also, the Dev Essentials gives you some Azure credits. Not a lot, but enough to get started. You also get Visual Studio Team Services. And by the way, I'm not from Microsoft at all. I just get a lot of value out of this, and it's totally worth it. So you get up to 5 users, you get private repositories for your code, and also you get all that Visual Studio stuff with Kanban boards and all that as well. So it's for your own personal stuff or what you're doing on the side, it's pretty cool. Also, when it comes to working with SQL Server, the developer tools, they opened up a lot of that to where that's available through this as well. So just with these 4 things alone, you have enough to get started to dig into nopCommerce or just about any other .NET-based solution and really see how it works. The one thing I like about this is that it also comes with a 3-month subscription to Pluralsight. So I really like that because I kind of watch a lot of Pluralsight, and I'm not so much bringing that up to where Pluralsight is this most awesome thing. It's just that I watch so much of that. Throughout this content, I'm going to reference different courses about whatever technology or framework that kind of takes this a little bit further. So I do recommend, whether it's Pluralsight, LinkedIn Learning, Udemy. For one, I'm curious what everybody does go to. This has just been my go-to source to deal with my imposter syndrome, to keep up with things. But I do recommend latching onto whatever online learning and then kind of really absorb as much as you can. So let's just jump into open source. So a lot of us think of GitHub when we think of open source, which is by far still probably the best place to jump in and see what's out there. I started to look at different content management systems like Baluka and .NET Nuke has been out there for a while, and Orchard, as well as the Humanitarian Toolbox. Then I started to get more intrigued by the different e-commerce solutions out there, like nopCommerce, and there's also VertoCommerce and SmartStore.net, which is an interesting story to SmartStore.net. So when it comes to GitHub, I have a little bit of a pet peeve to where when someone brings up GitHub, it's kind of passive, as if you really shouldn't go out there unless you're really interested in some framework or a library to see what that's about. But I mean, this is really a library that everybody should be looking at closer. And it's for that reason there are a lot of end-to-end solutions out there that are worth looking at for what you have implemented at your day job. So by just kind of picking one of them and going with it for a while, you'll find some value. So .NET Nuke, I mean, that's been around for a while. That was kind of like the first .NET open source one that I kind of came across. It's been out there a while, still going strong. And Brocco CMS, they have a pretty nice marketplace when it comes to content management systems, and when it's just when it comes to like involvement from the community, they have like an annual conference and things of that nature. So for CMS, it's worth looking at. Orchard is another CMS that's worth looking at as well. But if you're looking for an open source project that kind of has a little more purpose, this one's pretty popular and brought up by the guys from .NET Rocks a lot. That you really want to do something that feels like you're wanting to contribute for a purpose, the Humanitarian Toolbox is worth checking out. When I first started looking at the e-commerce solutions, nopCommerce was the first one I found. So this is the first one I started looking at a little bit closer, but I just wasn't totally sure yet if I want to kind of dig into it much further. In the e-commerce space, VertoCommerce has an architecture that might be more appealing to some because it has Angular, Bootstrap, uses Elasticsearch for searching. So there's a lot to be learned from this architecture that may not be so appealing as saying for the nopCommerce architecture. Then I came across this one, SmartStore.net. Now, this open source solution, I really liked what I saw. How the demo ran, and when I was looking at the code, I'm like, man, this source code looks really familiar. So then I open up the nopCommerce code, and I do a little bit of searching, and I see that there's a lawsuit because it looks like SmartStore.net went ahead and copied nopCommerce's code, went ahead and put it out under their name, and they're trying to build up their own community and open source marketplace and so on like that. So I was definitely turned off by that. So I kind of started working with nopCommerce and really didn't look back. They did settle the legal issues, but it was pretty messy. So as a developer, once you kind of settle on something open source, I recommend settling on it. It's so easy to bounce around because we're developers wanting to look at multiple projects. But once you find something that's kind of in line with your workplace or what you're interested in, just give it time and kind of focus on that code base, especially if it's an end-to-end solution. So what I also look for in different open source projects is, like this one, you can run online right away. You can just run the store or the administration site and kind of watch that example. And most are familiar with this. When it comes to going to GitHub, you can actually look at source code and all that. The barrier to entry of actually exploring source code is really low. You can look at source code online here. If you wanted to use a certain client to go ahead and connect to the repository, you can, like with SourceTree or Tortoise, or you can just download the zip file. But when it comes to just kind of seeing what's out there, you can explore the code online. One thing that's good to know about nopCommerce, when you also want to look at the popularity in a way, like how active it is. nopCommerce, like many other projects, came from codeflex.com, and which was Microsoft's open source site that basically closed its doors, and now everything's pretty much moving over to GitHub. So nopCommerce, like many other active open source projects on CodeFlex, are moving to GitHub. Yes.
What does NOP stand for?
I have no idea. Yes.
No operation.
What's that?
No operation.
I'll go with that.
No,
Sweet, I know. I'm gonna go with that one, whether that's true or not. BuildWith. How many have heard of buildwith.com? This is an awesome site. In other words, I put in nopCommerce, I can see where it's popular by region, I can compare it to other open source projects or other products in general and how it compares. You can put in just a website of any kind, and it'll tell you what the components are behind that website. So it's a very valuable website to kind of see not only how a technology is, how popular it is, but also to see how that website is built. So I actually discovered nopCommerce through the web platform installer. How many people look at this at all? So before even looking at GitHub, I actually discovered nopCommerce through this interface. So it's good to be aware that GitHub's not the only place, but you know, it is one of the most popular places, of course. So some of the opportunities with nopCommerce. There's a marketplace. You know, you can sell plugins, themes. That's probably the most common approach for .NET developers on looking at nopCommerce and many open source projects. But you know, that might be your first inclination of what's worth looking at here. Jobs. You can get certified in nopCommerce. You can kind of niche down and really specialize in this product, increase your bill rate. You know, there's a good market out there for it. You can be a store owner, start selling your own stuff. You can also consider the drop shipping route, which means you put up a site and you have a wholesaler that's basically storing and shipping your products. So if you want this side business, you could do that. But I really do recommend, this is really for you. So nopCommerce or any other open source project, there's 3 different ways to think about how you want to communicate your career in a job interview. Most people do 1 or 2. First one is you start talking about your current job and what you're doing and sharing all that proprietary information with your future employer. It's really not cool to do that if you're giving too many details. It's cool. You might think it's cool because you did some cool stuff, but you know, they're going to read that. The second is you're probably going to want to share as a developer all that stuff you're doing on your own, like you're creating the next ORM or whatever framework, you know, whatever product you're doing. That in itself could be kind of taken as a little bit negative as well, because an employer might think that, oh, you're trying to impose your framework into our environment, or they kind of get that vibe. So I recommend this third aspect on communicating what you know within your career. Find an open source project that you can talk about to communicate what you know, because that will be kind of regarded as, for one, you're involved, and you're not divulging any secrets that they can't confirm or as such. So in just improving your career, I think it's very valuable to dig into a product such as this as a reference architecture. So what is nopCommerce? So all different features can be extended through plugins and themes. There's a roadmap that can be looked at as well. There is an ASP.NET Core version coming, so I'll touch on that at the end. The storefront itself, it's kind of what you would expect. It's has a decent landing page, so this is the out-of-the-box theme that you would see. Has a decent landing page, decent shopping experience, decent checkout experience. It's mobile ready, so mobile devices, it does look pretty good. The administration page, so same thing. it's mobile ready. But the one thing about the administration page that might relate to more of what you're doing at your day job, there's a lot of just different things to manage. So looking at this as a reference architecture and how they're making all this happen, might be worth checking out. So for all these different technologies, this is kind of just flashed up there, but we kind of want to start thinking about where these things fit as we kind of walk through an architecture. So we're going to be walking through the front end to the back end. So the different application entry points, we're going to see how Razor is utilized, not so much jQuery. And then we're going to go into the business layer, which will show an example of AutoFact. How many are familiar with AutoFact? How many have used AutoFact? Okay. All right, and then the data access layer. When it comes to identity framework. Now, in just exploring this architecture, every one of these pieces I learned something new about that technology and how to do something different. Identity framework and how it's utilized within this solution, I haven't seen done before. I was impressed. I might apply to my next project, I'm not sure, but I'm curious if anybody else is seeing what you're about to see later implemented for Identity Framework like nopCommerce has done. So the projects themselves are pretty straightforward to follow through, or to kind of walk through, and it's nice that they have a whole bunch of plugins as well out of the box that are there as a reference. So we're just going to keep these technologies in mind. We're going to be looking at code, but more so, we're just going to keep in mind that we're looking at Razor and how code is structured as we look at the different projects. So the projects aren't this clean on how they're related to each other for how nopWeb, the front end, relates to the services, relates to nopData. It's a little bit more messy. There's a little bit more of a web going on there. So more for simplistic sake, for the most part, it's close to that first slide, but when it comes to data, I tend to think of data as not just a database, but it could be caching, file I/O, and that's all coming from nopCore. So it's not, no architecture is perfect. That's kind of, I guess, the point I'm really trying to make here. And you should not expect that out of any particular product. But this product does separate the concerns pretty well. So let's jump into the application entry points. So I'm really going to just highlight, a few things within the storefront app, touch on the administration app, and also mention how you can have some web service endpoints as well, because I kind of look at those as an entry point to your system. So this is about learning by example. So I'm not trying to point out the most complicated areas of the code. It's really the more consistent areas of the code. And I would kind of picture this like you're going on day one of the job, you're getting onboarded, you're getting thrown into this code base. So it's, the code base you have seen for the first time. And there's a chance that some of these technologies you've seen for the first time as well. So we're just going to kind of work on through it, but there's going to be some assumptions made that you would probably need to look, kind of read up more later on. But this is really just a walkthrough of the architecture. So don't feel like disappointed if you don't understand Razor or things of those nature. All right, so we're going to go through nopWeb and nopAdmin. So the nopWeb, if you make that your startup, this is what you would see. However, the first time that you start it, you get prompted for a where do you want to put the database type page. And you can create some sample data in there, which I recommend if you're just looking at this architecture. One thing that doesn't stand out for this application is that the database connection info, typically you'd find that like in the web config, and it's actually stored in the settings text app data folder. So I had to do a little bit of searching to figure that out. It wasn't obvious. So when walking through the architecture, you might have the tendency to go to that home page and just look behind the home page and kind of look at the markup and see what's going on behind there. And then you see these placeholders for like widgets and actions. And this is really just more of a container page. That's really good if you're creating plugins, whatnot, to kind of see how this is handled. But when it comes to understanding just a really simple example of a more common page, I went ahead and just picked the registration page. Not the best page to pick, but it's a very easy one to follow and see the consistency of how this architecture is implemented. And yes, I'm old, so I don't know why I put my real birth date on there. I'm gonna pass that. All right. So when I walk through an architecture, a ASP.NET MVC architecture, and again, this is MVC5, I'll typically start at the controller, in which that page was returned by the register action result method, in which the controller basically returns a view, in which that controller created the model that was passed to that view. So very common pattern for what you'd see in MVC applications. So let's kind of move on from that, because there's nothing nopCommerce like or specific there. So if we look at something like on the model, to where we see not resource display name. So when it comes to localization, for a pattern to see how localization was handled, nopCommerce kind of figured that out, and they have a pretty good pattern in here on how to deal with multiple languages. And you're also going to see they have a pretty good pattern when it comes to validation too. So that entry for the last name, we're just kind of really focusing on one simple example. We have some helper methods here of like label for, edit for, required hint, and validate message for. So label for and required hint, that is something nopCommerce provides. Required hint just does that little asterisk saying that's required if the last name's empty. The validation message for, we're going to touch on this just a little bit more later, but this actually provides a fluent approach to validation when it comes to your model, and it utilizes the library for that. Before we look at that one, let's look at the label for one, to where we see some HTML extension methods to where that label for is utilizing that attribute off the model in order to kind of like figure out what to show. So as an example, I don't know how many you have to deal with localization in your software. There's an example for how localization could be handled here. And this is not about going through every line of code. This is trying to just give us a general sense of what nopCommerce has on top of whatever technology. So there's a lot of common practice here when it comes to just MVC. And again, for the front end side, I'm just trying to highlight some of the pieces that nopCommerce has implemented that might be a little different from the architectures that you're used to. So validation. It uses fluid validation for its models. Normally when you're not using a library such as this fluid validation from Jeremy Skinner, you're putting this kind of this kind of validation on like attributes of your model. This provides a better separation of your validator to your model. So with this being referenced, and we kind of utilize that space of fluent validation attributes, we have an attribute for our model as a whole that we just basically say for this particular model, you're going to use this validator. Now here's the value of that. Look closer at that validator, which again is utilizing a lot of the features from that fluid validation. We see, hopefully you guys can see that. We have in one line on how last name is getting validated in a fluid manner. So normally on the last name property of the model, you would have some kind of validation there. But this is a fluid way of kind of binding at runtime the validation to the model. The real value here is that you can inject data into your validator. So if you're wanting to pass the localization, that's data, that's metadata, but it's getting injected. You're validating against a list of states. Very simple example there. So that data, that list of states, is getting injected into the validator. So it's a nice separation of your model to validator and also makes it more testable. Any questions so far? I'm going to keep on flying through because everybody had turkey and I know what that does to you. So I'm going to keep the pace going. So the administration side, the thing to really point out there is that it's a very common approach for what you would see I really don't get in the code on this one, but you got that typical navigation on the left-hand side. You got some search across the top that gives you a result grid. One thing that's kind of interesting from a UI perspective on the administration side is that it does use Kendo UI under the covers, just for the grid. So if you want to see a good implementation of Kendo UI, this product is worth checking out. So to wrap stuff up on the UI, when it comes to providing like a web service endpoint, that right now is really best managed like through a plugin. So someone created nopTemplates created a web API plugin that's easily installed with this product to where you can provide some endpoints. So, like I said, I'm going to mention a few courses on Pluralsight, just because I think they relate pretty heavily to this code base. One of them is when it comes to just understanding the MVC request cycle. This is a pretty good one by Alex Wolf. And he also created another one. I see a lot of heavy use of creating extension methods for Razor views. So this is another course that by Alex, improving your MVC applications with 10 extension points, that I also thought related really well. All right, so we're going to get into the business logic. So hopefully you notice I'm not trying to teach MVC or anything like that. Yes?
Before you get into that, does that front end have the ability to very easily set up like a login screen, forgot my password?
Yes, yeah. And I'm kind of, it's very feature rich. So I kind of really focused on just the registration, kind of a boring page to focus on. But yes, it's very feature rich on just managing customers and even just there's a lot of levels of permissions on types of customers. So yeah, it's really pretty rich there. So yes, I mean, you notice I'm not really trying to like teach MVC. There's always more to learn on that. So when it comes to the business logic, let's just go ahead and jump right into that. So we're going to be looking at nop services and nop core a little closer for where the business logic resides. And let's recap a little bit. It's where a user, when they're making a request to the app, they're coming through the controller. A controller really creates that model, and then that model is also passed to the view as the controller returns that. So therefore, the view has a reference to that model. Common MVC stuff. So that data has to come from somewhere. And that's where the controller is actually going to be working with calling a service, and that service will then be populating a domain entity, which those domain entities are going to be used to populate the model. And the separation of concerns, you hear this a lot, this architecture really does provide that. So the model doesn't it's not sent to the service, it works with returning entities that get populated to the model. So it is a good example of separation of concerns, as well as when it comes to dependency injection and an IOC container. This is a really good architecture for that as well to review. So dependency injection and inversion of control. So this is kind of new to you. It's probably hard to really understand the value of this, but let's really think about, and I'm going to jump into code here very soon. I kind of put all this definition out here just to kind of, this is how it's usually said. The theory is kind of shown, or the theory is usually said before the actual code is shown. But anyway, a dependency injection is most commonly passed through a constructor. So all the data that class needs could be injected through the constructor. I would say it's most commonly. I've seen it not only in nopCommerce, but in many other applications. So for your business tier to be totally separated from your data tier, you should be injecting how it's going to get its data. You shouldn't be making connections to databases and all that within that same code that has business logic around it. And that's what this code does not do, which is good. So if you're using dependency injection, things can get complicated really quick to where you need some kind of framework to manage all that dependency injection. So I think this is still best explained through code. All right, so we're going to look at the customer controller. We could have looked at a service as well. So within the constructor of the customer controller, we see, I think if you counted them up, you'd see 35. You see 35 different things that go get data from somewhere. Usually called service, sometimes they're called factory, sometimes they're called helper, but nonetheless, they're going to get data or metadata from somewhere for your application. So yes, all those things are getting injected through the constructor. And the one example we're looking at earlier, when it comes to that registration page, it was just using just that one, the customer model factory in order to get the data for that. So why do we do this? Why do we make it so hard as developers? Why do we do this? The seasoned developers know the answer right away. It's not a trick question. Testing. Thank you. So yes, it's for testing. So an example of one of the tests that are in nopCommerce, maybe not the best looking example, is where you can mock data, you can fake data, and test that particular service and focus on the logic where you mock data. So you really just want to have ultimate control of your data, and that's why we inject data for any kind of logic that we're trying to test. So with 35 dependencies, what if we just focused on that very first one, the address model factory? Let's just focus on that first one. And what if we wanted to, set up a no parameter constructor on that controller and manually create that first one, that address model factory, and all of its dependencies. So it's the dependencies of the dependencies of the dependencies that get out of control. If we just want to instantiate just that one manually, there's over like 200-300. This is not actually in nopCommerce. I just want to see how far this would go one day, and I started creating this code to see how crazy this could get just for that one of 35 things getting instantiated manually. Now, I didn't bother with the rest, as you see. So that's why, if you're going to do dependency injection, you really got to think about how you're also going to eventually adopt an IOC container such as AutoFact. So that craziness of managing dependencies of dependencies, like database connections and things of that nature, things get out of hand very fast, as you see, if we try to do that manually. So AutoFact, the way it's implemented in nopCommerce is that they got this dependency register class that has the register method that populates the AutoFact container builder. So that address model factory that you saw, all those lines of code, if we're going to do it manually, it's done with one line of code using AutoFact and also specifying the criteria that we only want one instance of that for the application. So if you're going down the route of manually injecting that data and because you want to make things testable, something like AutoFact really makes this a lot easier. I see a question. No? Okay. So AutoFact, you can actually specify criteria, like what you want to add to the container builder by, like, for criteria, by type. This one might make sense to where if you want to just all the controllers, just read all the assemblies and let AutoFact handle its instantiation of all those pieces. So just this one line of code would have handled that controller and its 35 things that it had. More commonly, it's the database connections that you're dealing with the most probably in your application. So here's an example of how AutoFact is used to manage the database connections within nopCommerce. So this is on start of the application. It kind of registers all this information with AutoFact. AutoFact handles all the instantiation of how to get to your data, wherever that data is. AutoMapper. Now this is a pretty popular library. I'm curious if anybody's heard or using this one. Cool. Jimmy Bogart, if you're not using this library, it has so much value that you can do so much in one line of code that would take quite a few. So, for example, we want that entity that the service populated, and we want to fill it into the model. So a lot of times you might be writing code of this object, property name, last name, this other object, property name, last name, doing equal, and just kind of populating the object. Well, that's what AutoMapper does for you. So nopCommerce has implemented this through its extension methods. So like if you want to take that entity and populate a model, you got this toModel extension method that really calls this one-liner of AutoMapper. So the actual magic of AutoMapper is just through the one line. Yes?
So my commercial application, I've had a developer go ahead and use this, and it looked totally useless to me, because, and maybe he's just done it wrong. But his map is simply exactly what you said. It's A equals A, B equals B.
Yep.
So what's the advantage, since you like it, what's the advantage of using AutoMapper instead of just using one method that says A equals A, B equals B?
Oh, just less code. I mean,
Well, yeah, but you know, your map is that same code. So what's the advantage of using mapper map, which is this code block that says A equals A, B equals B, or using mapper method that I've created that says A equals A, B equals B?
well, I guess the method itself, you still create it. It's just getting to those individual details, you know, of last name, first name, and all the different properties.
And so is the map inside of AutoMapper.
Yes.
Doing the exact same thing as a property I would create without all the overhead of AutoMapper.
Yep.
And that I could just call two objects, source and destination.
Right, but I guess I've seen where, when it comes to the question of performance, that AutoMapper has still been just as good, if not better in many ways, when it comes to doing this, populating one entity to another. You can get kind of complex with this though too, if you really wanted to. But yeah, I've always seen a lot of value in just having this available, and when it comes to the extension method route, it's kind of makes it a little bit cleaner. So as an example, so here we're calling the service, we're populating the manufacturer entity. So we just call that extension method toModel. That's just kind of populating that. So I've heard that concern before about performance, and I just have yet to really see that ever be a
Performance, it just seems like a, hey, let's use this because we don't know how to code.
Oh, yeah. It's really to reduce code that you could forget a property to pass.
But you could forget it in your map too.
Yes, you could. Yes. All right, so to kind of summarize this part up a bit, so we had the service kind of populate some entities that got built into the model. But we didn't really talk about any of the logic yet. So, like for what a service has inside of it. Now, this is a pretty simple example to where we just have this delete customer. It's not really going to delete anything. It just appends a dash deleted to an email or to the username, and then just updates the customer. So, not the most complicated business logic, but this is probably the right place for logic in general. And notice that it only works with the entities. So the service knows nothing about the model or what's going on in the UI. And those entities are actually, they're pretty dumb. In other words, it's just properties and collections. And I like how that separation of logic is also in place here. So for the most part, those entities are just kind of like data transfer objects. They have no more logic inside of them. So practical IOC, this is a really good course. He also compares different IOC containers. So AutoPack is mentioned in here, as well as Ninject and a few others. It's a pretty good course to check out. All right, so let's move on to the data access layer. Any questions so far?
What bridge is that?
I'm sorry?
What bridge is that?
I have no idea. Oh, what is it? Looks like looks like the Golden Gate from here. I'll even share the reference where I got all these pictures, because you can use them in your own presentations for free. So when it comes to just exploring any product, I tend to look at the database first before looking at data access layers to see if it's even worth kind of pursuing further. It's a very easy to follow architecture at the database level. It does map pretty close to how the data access is lined up. So it utilizes EF6, which is an ORM, Object Relational Mapper. But nopCommerce uses entity framework more as an abstraction to data access. So this is where I'm curious if anybody has seen entity framework implemented in this manner. So we're going to look at how the service is going to work with a repository, and the repository is going to basically call a mapper type class, which is going to basically fill right into these entities. So for what we're about to get into. So looking at code, within the service, get customer ID, it simply calls a get or a customer repository get by ID. So it's that repository that's actually getting data back from the database. But this is actually using an interface that was injected, or is an implementation of the interface of iRepository of type customer. So I've seen this before, to where you have a generic repository pattern of a certain type, and then also like the method get by ID is also implemented in a generic way as well. So looking at that interface a little closer, that's where you see, you'll see like get by ID, insert, update, all these common methods that you can perform on an entity that would be implemented by entity framework because it implements that particular interface. So I get by ID, it's using the entities.find, which is kind of interesting. They also have an article in there about why you may or may not want to use it. So that's in the source code. So in looking at this EF repository a little closer, I also noticed that they got this table property that implements iQueryable. And iQueryable is just really calling into entities, which returns a DB set, like an entity framework DB set. So what does this really mean? So if we look at this particular method in the service layer, in the business layer of get customer by GUID, we see really a link to objects query. So it doesn't have to be entity framework. Entity framework is implementing the interface, but it then gets projected to entity framework to handle the data access. So if you had a different ORM honoring that interface, it could then be put in place of entity framework, like an Hibernate or one of the micro ORMs like Dapper and so on. I don't know if I personally go down this route, but what this really kind of shows is that you could have this kind of logic that you normally have like in a query in your data access layer, but you can have it in your business layer. I don't know if everybody really would agree with that. That's the best thing to do. But it is probably the first example I've seen of this on how a product is abstracting entity framework as an ORM within the solution. Has anybody seen this before?
If we use OData,
Yeah.
OData have a similar concept here in OData, where because that returning it as iQueryable, the query doesn't get executed until you call like first or default. Then it takes that and generates a SQL that goes with that.
Gotcha. You know, it's funny, I gave this talk one other time before, and it was a younger gentleman that says, yes, our professor taught us that in college. I was like, really? He taught you entity framework this way. I was pretty impressed with that. So, yeah, normally I see it a little bit more hard-coded to the ORM, not so much being abstracted like this. How many people use entity framework? I'm curious of that. Okay. Would you do this?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Maybe being good, yeah.
Well, personally, I mean, I kind of struggle with it in a way. It's like, it's very powerful, but then it kind of gets almost too powerful in the business layer. So anyway, so this is what you get when it comes to really digging into some of these open source projects. You start to discover something you thought you really knew very well, and you see a different take on it, more of a streamlined take on it than maybe you expected. So let's kind of summarize to where from the repository, it's going to work with a mapper. And so that mapper class really provides that metadata about the data layer itself, like the length of a column, basically. A lot of times you'll see this, instead of being like a fluent approach here, you'll see this on attributes on the entity itself. So the separation of the entities to mapping the data going to those entities, that metadata is abstracted in this fluent way as well, kind of like the validator. And this is really an inherited feature from Entity Framework. So this isn't something, even though you see it's inheriting a nopCommerce class, it's actually a little deeper than that, and it's coming from Entity Framework itself to do this fluent, not validation, but fluent way of adding metadata to your entities. So there's a lot more to discover. It comes to data access, how it manages image files, configuration management, the cloud solution for Azure is fairly interesting. Redis, I'm curious, how many people have used Redis or heard of Redis? When it comes to performance, if you have a high volume system, it's basically a caching solution that's also implemented in nopCommerce. And Entity Framework in the enterprise, Julie Lerman's kind of like the go-to person on Entity Framework, and I thought that this particular course kind of defined best a lot of the different patterns that were in nopCommerce. Test coverage. So we're not going to dwell on this, but we're going to kind of take a peek at what this open source solution that's very popular, what kind of test coverage it has. First, we should get on the same page. When I think of testing, there's functional testing, which comes from the UI perspective. So like Selenium is a popular UI testing framework. Test Stack is one that I've been kind of digging into more, the test that has like a layer around Selenium as well as desktop application testing. Integration testing, so when you're actually hitting data, hitting the database, hitting web services, that's more integration testing. And then unit testing, true unit testing, is where you're not hitting any data, you're injecting the data by mocking it to really test the logic. So most of the testing within nopCommerce that's created is unit tests. And really not really any of the either two. So a typical test structure, it uses an end unit, and typical test fixture is what you would expect if you're familiar with looking at tests. It's where you have different repositories that are going to be mocked out through a setup method. And normally when you look at the different tests, a lot of times you expect to see an assert. I'm curious if anybody does this in their code as well, to where they even kind of they utilize extension methods rather than just doing assert, they kind of put it into extension methods. So should equal really does call assert, but just kind of has a little bit better syntax of comparing the expected value versus the actual value. So even something as minor as this, by exploring the test, I kind of got a good takeaway from that. To run NUnit tests in Visual Studio, you really do need to install the extension of the NUnit 3 adapter. That way it's kind of built into, or use what's built into Visual Studio. So I went ahead, this is the 3.9, what you can just download as the release product, the nopCommerce 3.9 version, and I just downloaded it, installed it, and ran all the tests. And I saw a failed test. So, like, I didn't really expect to see failed tests for one. I mean, this is a product, very large install base that's used in many production systems. I look at this, some may look at this and say this software, I wouldn't touch that because I'm just out of the gate on a failed test. But, it is open source. I kind of look at it as opportunity. So if you want to get involved, you could actually see where whatever product, nopCommerce or any other product, this might be an area to help. So kind of digging this a little bit closer, just the whole solution itself, only 20% coverage. But honestly, that doesn't tell me a whole lot. But if I looked at, let's say, one of those projects, like where a lot of business logic resides in nop services, I just see 9% coverage. So that doesn't really make me feel much better. What we've been looking at, the customer service class, that's 4% coverage. Not exactly getting you excited about how well tested this product is, I'm sure. But then let's say we look at one of these methods that has 96% coverage. Let's look at that one. So when you look at the overall test coverage, that one is 96% covered. The only criteria that wasn't covered is that first null check. Well, okay. It's kind of a false positive in a way. It's like, okay, that's 96. If I'm looking at numbers only, that is 96, but that doesn't prove much to me. That's not a very complex method. And the one thing it should test, it doesn't test. It's the only thing it has an if condition in there for, really. So my point of this is that any project that has test coverage around it, don't get thrown off by the coverage numbers. You really should look at the actual coverage of what it really is covering, and of course the test cases themselves to see if they're really valid. So I've not only just nopCommerce, I've looked at many other systems to where people talked about how well things are covered, and then you look a little deeper and you see stuff like this, and you're like, okay, that's not really helping much. So don't just go by the numbers. You hear about your project should always be 100% covered. Yes, they should, but what does that really mean? It's always good to look at the actual coverage. Automating testing end-to-end. This one's a really good one by Jason Roberts. Kind of breaks up those layers as well. And Test Stack, if you're interested in that library, there's a course on that. That's really good. All right, so we're going to kind of move through extensibility and kind of wrap this up. I'm just going to touch on extensibility. So before you even try to extend any product, if there's some examples out there, it's always good to kind of check out what's out there. nopCommerce has 735 live shops that have been customized. So if you want to get some ideas how you're going to customize this product, there's a lot out there to look at to see what can be done. So of the plugin projects themselves, for something that's more UI based, there's the Nevo slider plugin that is a good example of that carousel slider. And if you want something that's more end-to-end example, that fixed store by weight under the shipping namespace is a pretty good one that kind of messes a little bit with the UI, but then does a lot with the business and having its own data source. So if you were looking at putting in some kind of plugin architecture into your own system, this is a great reference architecture, because this allows for someone to create a plugin that creates its own table source. So it extends the application. This plugin architecture is partly why nopCommerce is so popular. It's fairly simple. So if you're looking at having any kind of plugin architecture in your own application, this is a really good reference. The marketplace itself, as a developer, you can gauge how much you could probably sell a plugin for. There's also a lot of free ones out there. And if you're interested in nopCommerce plugin development, this is a really good course. Matter of fact, it's so good, I even debated on doing this talk period because I thought he did such a good job on just explaining nopCommerce that I was like, go check out this course if you're interested. But there's certain things that are getting a little dated in there, and it's still worthwhile when it comes to focusing on how to create plugins. But that course really gets into plugins, not so much themes. Themes are more about the front end, to where plugins, again, are more about the business and data access layer and so on. So in summary, there's more documentation on nopCommerce site. There's a lot on YouTube as for like past conference talks from nopCommerce. All those photos are on Unsplash, they're royalty free. It's kind of cool, you can just draw a photo. It's good to give them credit though, you don't have to. So the nopCommerce conference is in New York, and the founder, Andre, he's the one on the far left, he really got me more involved in just doing anything open source, even just doing this talk. When you find an open source project, reach out to the founder or organizer, because they're going to get you a little motivated to do something, especially if they're as responsive as Andre was. I'm just, encouraging to do whatever with the product. So I would say that in just kind of interacting with Andre, that kind of got me more involved. And also, we're expecting at the conference that the ASP.NET Core version will be announced in some fashion. They actually just released the beta of that yesterday to the public. So, there will be a lot going on in this space as for moving to the newer stuff. Enough to where it's going to bring on Hanselman to do the keynote for the conference. So this kind of leads to like my path in open source. I'll kind of just fly through this. So I basically, what if I did this talk at your conference? He said, absolutely. Love for you to give the .NET overview of our software at the talk. I don't work with nopCommerce every day. I just dug into it on my own. So when you find somebody that's pretty supportive and engaging for an open source project, it will lead to other things that you did not expect. Maybe speaking at their annual conference, maybe like I'm going to be working on next year using TestNet, some better UI testing, and also probably get involved in integration test and unit test as well. But this is really leading to, I proposed a full stack developer online training series to Pluralsight. Pluralsight's, that sounds great. Let's do this. So I'm looking at using nopCommerce as the basis for that architecture, and I'm looking at the first course being ASP.NET versus ASP.NET Core, a comparison course to compare two technologies. Like, great, when can you start? So by exploring more of a product, not only just kind of reaching out to the organizers and kind of whatever you're doing with it, you might lead to online training, it might lead to, like I said, certification. There's so many different avenues that I did not expect out of this. And then there's some future courses that I'm going to be taking nopCommerce as the base and kind of refactoring and comparing other technologies as well. So just to give a visual on that. So what if I want to change out jQuery in the Razor View engine with something like AngularJS? What does that look like? I kind of find value in this kind of content where you can compare one technology to another in an enterprise level application versus the hello world type stuff. So it might be AngularJS, might be React, Angular 2 plus, Angular 4 with TypeScript, and then the latest buzz is probably Vue.js. So there's so many different aspects on how you can compare and contrast technologies. So like AutoFact, you could probably change out NInject. On the ORM side, you could change out Entity Framework. Within Hibernate, or even Dapper, for some reason that micro ORM is heavily requested on their issue board. For some reason, a lot of people that work in nopCommerce really want to use Dapper instead of Entity Framework. And then a lot of environments, instead of SQL Server, what would it look like compared to Oracle? I'm not really a fan of Oracle. I worked with Oracle, but nonetheless, they have licenses to use. So just as for learning, SQL Server versus Oracle, I see this has value, and also Postgres is another aspect as well. So there's so much content that's going to come out of this that it kind of keeps going and going. Next year I'll be offering a full stack developer workshop that's based around this content as well. But the main takeaways for you is really just to find an open source project, apply it, and promote it. Here's my info. Send me an email if you want a PDF of this or even the presentation itself. I'll have a link on YouTube as well of me kind of just reading my notes. And it really, if any of this is of interest to you, nopCommerce, Pluralsight, TestStack, the full stack developer stuff, or if you can simply have any questions or feedback, just email me. And thank you. You might have noticed I'm kind of a PowerPoint geek too, so if you have any questions about PowerPoint, feel free to reach out.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
And now it's time to thank our sponsors. Our platinum sponsors are Epitech, DevExpress, Galaxy Solutions, Brightwing, OSD, and gold sponsors are RMC, Robert Half, X2, and platinum sponsor for our meeting space is Microsoft. And for our gold sponsors for our swag are Introgistics, JetBrains, and Codesmith. And volunteers don't just do the work, they make it work. So our volunteers are Andre Wallace for our speaker coordinator, Jeff Thompson, welcome champion, Ken Patton is our board advisor, and Gary Beaver, our swag. And our officers is me, Ryan Albertson, Vice President, Dustin Kinjan is Secretary, and Nick Dole as Treasurer. So Michigan Dev, if you haven't joined yet, everyone is welcome to join our Slack channel and chat with fellow Michigan developers. Our meetup site. So for the latest updates on Gang, please visit our meetup site by going to that link or just by Googling My Gang meetup. Also, if you go to our mygang.org, there's a link to the meetup too. So Gang conference.
Oh yeah. So TLDR, we're not doing a normal third Wednesday meeting like always. Next month, we're going to be putting on like a one-day conference. We've got speakers lined up. Friesen, this will be his only speaking engagement of the year, and he's going to do something fun. Gaines, if none of you have seen him speak, we're actually flying him in so we can get some kind of outside talent. Giard, our journal president, and Jennifer are both going to be coming in. We haven't seen them in forever. Yeah. It is still free, but we're essentially just asking the people that have always been members to keep supporting us and just kind of increasing the perks for new people who want to become members. If you become a member, which you can do on the Eventbrite, which is linked right there, that'll get you a guaranteed seat in November. It'll get you an invitation to our Christmas party, which of course we pay for the food and the beer at, and it'll also get you a guaranteed seat at John Skeet in January. So we actually have perks for membership now, yay. There will be free tickets going on sale closer to the event. We just kind of want to give everybody that wants to be a member and wants to help us out a chance to grab a guaranteed seat ahead of time. So again, it's free, but we would really appreciate membership. It helps us out a lot. It helps us get great food. Did everybody like the food? So that is the TLDR. If you go to that link, it'll take you to Eventbrite. You can also just go to our website, mygang.org. There's a membership button. Click it, send us money, and then we will send you a code back. Pretty much, unless we have messaged you, your membership expires before the next meeting. So just keep that in mind. I think we only emailed like 2 people. So, and then again, we're going to have elections tonight.
Yep, there's going to be elections after the meeting.
Right. So you have to be a member to vote on the board. So come see me right now if you want to just become a member or do the Eventbrite or donation, and I'll see it.
Have we decided where our meetings are moving to?
No, straight up. The Farmington Hills Library is actually looking good right now. We scoped it out. It's, I think it's like $30 an hour. It would be, well, actually, that's a good point. For those of you that come to Gang, I know location is important. It's at Orchard Lake, like right off 696. Raise your hand if that's like a good location you would come to that for meetings.
Did you ask the very tech people across the street?
Dustin sent out an email and never heard back. But we went and looked like on our own. Lawrence Tech will let you rent the space, but it's even more expensive than the library. And the library is actually decent. The room's about this big.
One thing is, just to check, most libraries don't like you to have food.
This one's okay with it, actually. I'm 99% sure Dustin and Nick went and checked it out, and there was a group that was in there at the time that had food. So either they were breaking the rules or they're good with it. But yeah, so that would be preferable to downtown. We're looking at if we don't have anything better come along, we may end up at Epitech, which can support a decent sized crowd. If any of you have been there, it's a little more cramped, but Farmington Hills Library is just looking like the winner. The only trick is these meetings run about 3 hours, so it's adding about $100 a month to our meetings, which, again, if we have more members and more sponsors, that's much less of an issue because it only ends up being like, $1,200 a month, but that's still something for a nonprofit. So if anybody else has a great idea that can support, for a meeting space that can support up to about 100 people, you can still let us know. We will officially announce something next month for where the January meeting with John Skeet will be. So we've confirmed John too for January. something to keep in mind, our January meeting will most likely also be kind of weird because we kind of work around John Skeet's schedule because he's more important than all of us. So, cool. Come see me or go and give us money.
Well, I was going to tell Ryan that like the Rochester full stack group that I've been going to, they were looking for spots too, and then we were like at the library for a little bit, and we were at other places for a little bit. And they've had 3 in a row at the Rochester fire department, so maybe there's
fire department.
And I was like that too. Apparently they had like rooms that they could just like let people use. I don't even think it costs anything.
Fire department.
Yeah,
that is weird. I will totally check it out.
Yeah.
No, thanks. That's. We were looking at I don't remember who, but like literally just up the street here, less than half a mile, one of the like high-rise buildings has like a shared conference space that companies can rent. That Dustin's trying to track them down and like see if we can get it, but we'll know by next month. And then again, the holiday party. If you don't come next month, that'll be at Shields like always. We will announce dates and stuff closer to, but you need to be a member to come, so be a member.
So any first-time attendees today? Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Robert Pasco. I'm actually not a programmer, I'm a network admin, but my friend Jeff wanted to come on.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Here, let me add you to the sheet.
No?
There's one over here.
Okay, looking for work and looking for workers. Anyone looking for work? Nope. Okay, looking for workers.
I'm with X2. We're looking for everything from data architects, solution architects, all the way down to just database developers as well as software engineers. So if you're looking for consulting work, get your hands on different things.
Oh wait, you're already on
feel
it.
free to get a hold of me.
Is that you?
Anyone else?
Let me update you.
Okay.
So, you're good.
So after this, some of us will go to Shields for happy hour.
Come to the bar.
Yes, and but this is not a gang-sponsored event.
Bring money.
Yes. And well, that's after the election. So tonight's WAG is actually the books. So
yeah,
just like
grab
take whatever you want.
Everybody.
And yes, everyone.
Please make sure there are no books left over at the end. Yeah. Please, pretty please. So apparently, because Microsoft is moving, they basically just donated their library to us for swag. So thank Microsoft and go get books. Even crap books, you can use them as gag gift. Give the worst developer in your company some like VB.NET book.
And if you're a member, just stay in for the election.
Oh man, the next part of that joke is unless you are the worst developer in your company, then
I was just saying, don't make that joke. Yeah.
In reality, it's VBA.
Yeah, sure. All right.
Where's the Dustin?